Hi guys, and welcome to another Treasures from Our Attic. This week I'm going to show you all one of the earliest versions of the Monopoly board game. As you can tell, the box was much smaller when it first came out. All the money, the chance and community chess cards, the player pieces, everything came in this small box. The game board itself came in a separate box. The invention of Monopoly has been credited to a Charles Darrow when he sold it to Parker Brothers in 1935. However, after Parker Brothers bought the game from Darrow, they figured out Darrow had based it very heavily on another board game called the Landlord's Game, which had been patented in 1903 by Lizzie Magie. And just as a quick aside about Magie, she was a very interesting woman of her time, not a typical 19th century woman. Besides patenting this game in 1903, she also patented another invention in 1893, where she came up with a gadget that helped the paper pass more easily through the typewriter rolls. And this was at a time when patents were given to less than 1% of women, and Magie had too. But back to the game itself. While Darrow did make some changes to Magie's game, the bulk of Magie's game still was really there. And to avoid any future legal hassles, Parker Brothers approached Magie and they bought her patent to the Landlord's Game, as well as two other games for $500. And while that might seem like a lot of money in 1935, just for comparison, Darrow became a multi-millionaire selling his game that he based off of Magie's creation. Magie did not really seem to hold any grudges though. She said that as long as players learn about the evils of capitalism, then her work would not be in vain. And yes, that's right. Monopoly is based off of a game that's supposed to show the evil of monopolists and not favor them. When Magie came up with her game, she wanted to see it as an educational tool to teach more about the single tax theory that a politician, Henry George, was really pushing. And Magie really wanted to show how the single tax would discourage land speculation. She also did not seem to think too highly of politicians. One of the cards in her games said that you've been caught stealing from the public, and now all the rest of the players will call you senator. So when Parker Brothers started selling Darrow's version of the game in 1935, obviously the game has taken off and we are still playing it over 80 years later. We can say that this game came out between 1941 and 1945. And it might seem surprising because if you look at the pieces, they all pretty much have stayed the same over the past 80 years. All the money is the same color, the cards, the deeds, the houses and hotels. But there are two really big giveaways that show that this was made between 1941 and 1945. The first one is this patent. When Parker Brothers first started selling Darrow's game, they had patent pending on the boxes. Once they found out about Magie's game and they bought her patent, that was also then included on the boxes. Once Magie's patent expired in 1941, they took the patent off the box and then it just had their original patent. So this box came out after 1941, after her patent expired. The other big giveaway is the pieces themselves. Normally pieces are made out of metal, but during these years they were not. And so to think about why they were not made from metal, we just have to think about what was going on between 1941 and 1945, and that would have been World War II. Metal was very scarce back then, as were a lot of other resources. President Roosevelt at the time came up with the Office of Price Administration, and their responsibility was to place a ceiling on prices of most goods and to limit consumption by rationing. The OPA rationed automobiles, tires, gasoline, fuel, oil, coal, firewood, nylon, silk, and other things such as shoes. Americans would get ration cards that they could take into stores, and they would get their meager share of household staples, including meat, dairy, coffee, dried fruit, jam, jellies, lard, shortening, and oil. So even Monopoly was affected by this rationing. The military obviously had a preference to get the metal, and so during the war years, Monopoly made their pieces out of either little wooden tokens that looked like tokens from the Sorry game, or they made tokens out of sawdust and paper compressed together. which is what these are. The wooden tokens are a lot easier to find, made of wood, they've lasted longer. These kind of tokens tended to become brittle and not survive for too long. So it's really great that these are in as good a shape as they are. But we've got a car, a clog, an iron, a dog, a train, and then to me the most confusing, a bathtub. But it's really because of these pieces that we can really date this game to such a small time window. You can see the houses and hotels look exactly the same too, except they're not made of plastic, they are made of wood. There was two other things that I found interesting about this game. I did not know this personally, other people might have known this, but they actually had rules for two short game versions of Monopoly. One version was the time limit game, which is when you set a time to end the game, and then once the time hit, that's when the game ended. The player who was going would finish their turn, and you would add up all the money and see who won. The second version was about once the second person went bankrupt, then the game was over then, and once again you added up all your money and property, and whoever had the most won. And so it is rather ironic when you think about this game is really based off of trying to ideally show the dangers of capitalism, but the winners now, that's how you win, by being the best monopolist that you can. That is it for this week's Treasures from the Attic. I hope you all learned a lot, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you.